Well, good morning. This is May the 5th, Wednesday, 2021. Thank you for returning to this new daily broadcast, kind of a mini series on the book of Ecclesiastes, learning the right time to act. Learning the right time to act. Now, let me please say this. I'm glad that you are listening to these broadcasts, but please, they are not to replace your personal time with the Lord. These are simply additional tools for your toolbox after you have placed some tools in your own toolbox from your own study. This is a supplement. This is the gravy on the potatoes. You just don't eat the gravy, you eat the potatoes. This is the steak sauce on the deer burger. You just don't eat the steak sauce, you enjoy the meat as well. So having said that, let's take a look at our first phrase that has contrasting elements to it. A time to give birth and a time to die. I guess I find this kind of interesting that the Spirit of God would motivate Solomon to start out with the beginning and the end of a person's life. But let's stop and consider this, a time to give birth. The conception process that God has created in the biological world for us humans is still under the control of God. No matter what you do to try to achieve a successful conception, or how you might try to prevent it with birth control measures, if it's God's time for a woman to give birth, for that conception to take place and to bring it to maturity, then it's going to take place. We cannot hinder the plan of God. Now think about women who waited on God to answer their prayer about a child. Hannah prayed before the Lord silently, and Eli thought that she was drunk. Elizabeth had waited most of her life. The same way with Sarah, and did not conceive until their old age. Rachel was angry with her husband because she didn't have children like Leah did. Eve waited on the third-born son, Seth, after Cain murdered Abel. Mary, at such a young age, was given the honor to go ahead and become pregnant with the Christ child. There's no premature birth. That's a human diagnosis based on a time factor of maturation. If the child comes 2 weeks early, it's because God wanted that child to be born 2 weeks early. If for some women, the estimated time that the doctor gave that you should have your child on May the 2nd, and it is now May the 9th, does not mean that God has delayed, God has forgotten you. There is still a divine preparation that is taking place for that beautiful child. There is no untimely pregnancy. Untimely pregnancy is the human perspective on a situation that is difficult to begin with. A couple has 3 or 4 children, and then she becomes pregnant again, and we just can't afford to have another child. We're going to have to find another place to live. I'm going to have to go back to work. God knows all of that. So is God punishing me, punishing that couple because he has blessed them with another child? No. God has a purpose and a reason behind that. There's no child that is imperfect either. Again, that is a human subjective standard that has been so cast as a die into our culture that a birth defect or deformity, or the doctor during the pregnancy says you might want to consider terminating your pregnancy and aborting the child because the child would be blind and will not be able to care for himself, and eventually he will die, and eventually you might have to put him in a place where somebody else can take care of him. God creates each and every child. We think of the disciples' response to the blind man when they asked a cultural question: who sinned, his mother or he while he was in the womb? And Jesus said, neither. This child was born blind for the glory of God. And then we think about infants who die in childbirth or die soon after childbirth. Think of David's son, King David, and how his son died after several days of pleading with God by David, and God took the child home. In fact, David acknowledges that when he said, I cannot bring the child back to me, but I can go to where the child is. From a human perspective, that is devastating, and I can understand that. My wife had a miscarriage, and it was devastating. And I know of other ladies in churches that I've pastored that have experienced that sorrow. But God took our little girl, Megan, home because it was his plan. It was his purpose. He is sovereign. He is outside of time. He knew the beginning and the end and everything in between. And then a time to die. A time to die. Oftentimes at funerals, we hear people say, oh, he he died too soon. He had so much life ahead of him. There was so much good that he could have done. He was so talented. Why did God take him? Why did God allow this to happen? This is untimely. Well, if every birth is under God's sovereign control, then every death is under God's sovereign control. The Bible clearly states that no one can manufacture conception. God gives life and God removes life. Now, from a human perspective, these are painful situations sometimes. I can understand that. But in order to deal with the pain, we have to look at a sovereign God. And though we do not understand his purposes and his will all the time, we have to trust him. Who can understand the mind of Christ, the Bible says? Who can counsel God, the Bible asks? The answer is no human being can do that, because we have a sinful nature that seeks to rationalize and come up with a response that will soothe us in our sorrow. However, the comfort that we need during such times is from the God of all comfort, who witnessed his Son giving his life as a sacrifice for us. So there's a time to give birth. Some ladies I have counseled earlier in the counseling ministry, my biological clock is ticking. I need to get married. My parents want grandchildren. Wait a minute, time out. That is not the motivation. to go ahead and get married, first of all, or to have illicit sex so you can give your grandparents or your parents a grandchild. God knows when is the right time to give a child. God knows the exact time for the conception process to take place, and for Him, in the cooperation with the parents and the mother in particular, to live a healthy lifestyle to bring a child to full term for His purpose and for His glory. And it's also His prerogative on when to call His servant home, when the person passes from this confined world into a wide open space in heaven, basking in His glory. So yes, there's a time to give birth and a time to die. Tomorrow we'll take a look at a time to plant and a time to harvest. A time to plant, or as the Bible says, a time to uproot what is planted. I believe that's called harvesting. So, Lord willing, we will see you tomorrow. If you are enjoying these things, there is a like button underneath. You can just click on that. If you're not a subscriber, you can click on that as well. This helps us know that we are having a outreach to people. God bless.